Welcome to the MADS Analytics, Marketing Analytics Data Science Presents Ask the Experts. The goal is to be a sneak peek of MADS Live, which is happening in October, which is so exciting because I know I can't even remember the last time I saw people. Probably the last MADS. We're excited because we've got some really, really great speakers and some really great sponsors. So I'd like to just start off by thanking Outlier, Sisu, ObservePoint, Alight Analytics, Napkin Analytics for sponsoring this event. Really excited. I'm Scott. I'm going to be kind of your navigating you through this event. I'm normally based outside of Washington, D.C., but for this week, I am calling in from France. I run a small data and analytics company called Brooklyn Data that helps companies build out data capabilities. And I can talk for hours about that, but it's not about me. It's about the amazing speakers today. What we're going to do is we're going to try a really interesting format where essentially we're going to have each of these speakers has a couple topics they really want to talk about. So I'm going to kind of go through a speed round of intros where all the speakers are just going to say their kind of name, the company title, where they're calling in from, just so we know who's on the call. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the individual speakers. They'll do a kind of a more detailed introduction about themselves, their company, and we'll kind of dig into one of those topics. And the goal is actually to, let that speaker highlight their expertise, but then, the other panelists can jump in there. We can have folks asking questions, and then we'll just make sure every speaker kind of has a little bit of every panelist has their time to dig into their topic. And then we'll kind of do a free for all. We got a lot of really smart people, and we can talk about a lot of really interesting topics. So, I mean, honestly, if this goes well, I'm not talking a lot. The panelists are talking a whole heck of a lot, and then the attendees are asking really good questions. I feel very, very fortunate, very privileged to be on a call with these smart folks. So start thinking of some zingers to send them, and I'm sure they'll be able to take them on. So what I'd love to go to is that first agenda item is the quick intro. Again, I'm Scott, from Brooklyn Data. I'd love to have the panelists introduce themselves. You want to go Mike and then Shayna to do kind of the quick speed intro?
Sure. Thanks so much, Scott. And thanks so much, Mads, for hosting this event. My name is Mike Kim. I am the CTO, co-founder of OutlierAI. You can find us on the web at outlier.ai. And we're based just outside of Oakland. I'm based just outside of Oakland. Our company is based in Oakland.
Cool. Shayna, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Hi, guys. I'm Shayna Mura. I am the Director of Conversion Rate Optimization at Merkle in the EMEA region. I usually am in the UK. I'm currently in Toronto, Canada, visiting home.
Cool. I'm going to go Sid and then Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Mads, for hosting the event. I am Sid Sharma. I work at a company called Sisu Data, SISU-data.com. I'm based in San Francisco, and great to be a part of this conversation today.
Cool. Jim?
Can you hear me okay, Scott?
Yep, perfect.
Great. My phone kicked me off. I had to dial back in at speed. And thank you also for letting me show up and rant today. My name is Jim Kane. I'm the founder and CEO of Napkin Analytics, and we are based in Ottawa, Canada.
Cool. Mike or Matt, you wanna round us out?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Thanks for sponsoring this today. It's good to be with everybody. My name is Matt Hertig. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alight Analytics. We're here in Kansas City, Missouri. We have a platform called Channel Mix that's really a full stack platform from data aggregation to attribution to media mix modeling. So excited to join the discussion today.
Cool. So now that everybody knows who's on the call, I'd love to dive into our kind of first expert, our first panelist, Mike Kim from Outlier. Mike, tell us about Outlier. Tell us about data. Tell us about drop some knowledge on us.
Sure. So I'll start with the founding story for Outlier. And Outlier is really founded around the idea that my co-founder and I both had, which is around how do we really get the most out of the data that we already have? Data is coming at us so fast, and it's much more complex than it used to be. Decisions have to be made faster than ever. And in all the other previous roles we've ever had, we had the same problem, which is like how do we know what to pay attention to? What should we be looking at? And for all of us who've been working with data on this call, we all know the value of the right question. So can we get at the right question? And so my co-founder, Sean Burns, and I set out to do exactly that, is can we build a product to help analysts get at that question, that very critical question every single day? Like, what should I pay attention to? And so that's what we do. That's what OutlierAI is all about.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, hey, I mean, I think, one of the questions that kind of immediately comes to mind is that, there's just so much data flying at us these days. It's like, data is like, we've kind of solved the data collection problem, and like data is everywhere. I mean, so like even at Brooklyn Data, we're building infrastructure, we're surfacing insights, but like it's often kind of hard to know where to start or like where to pay attention to. I mean, what are your thoughts or advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say the data collection is solved. And I know we have some great speakers today who are going to tell us a little bit about how that's all about to go completely haywire with the third-party cookie thing.
Fair.
Yeah, but your points are totally valid. We all have way more data than we can shake a stick at, right? And I think that's something that we can all relate to, regardless of where we're at, or what we're doing. And I think as far as the other thing that kind of makes this a big wrinkle is, how many of us are dealing with a single place where we get our data? Like so many of us are dealing with places where data is siloed, it's in 6 different places, probably with 4 different organizational owners, and just even getting at the data sometimes, especially if you work in a large enough org, is a challenge, right? And for everyone who's done data implementations anywhere, like getting all your ducks in a row just to get the data right in one place where you can look at it is a significant challenge. I see some of my other co-panelists nodding because they've lived this exact nightmare, right? But say we've solved all the other problems in the data stack, right? I think what we're still dealing with is, what do we pay attention to? And so our answer for decades at this point, that's scary to say, but for decades now has been dashboards. Let's build dashboards. And so, we all have dashboards looking at all of our key metrics. But the problem with that is that's very much like the tip of the iceberg and what you know to pay attention to. And what about the rest of your data underneath the surface that you don't know what to pay attention to? Like the classic one I'd like to talk about is, you obviously know what your total page views coming to your website is. Everyone probably has a dashboard on the wall for that. And you might have like tracking total conversions. Well, what if it's a particular campaign on a particular day that is going gangbusters, and you really need to know that to pivot your strategy? Or, hey, it's going gangbusters for the wrong reasons because it's a click farm that's costing you tons of money. How do you know that where to look in this giant haystack? And of course, I'm here to tell you the answer is automation, right? Because there aren't enough hours in the day, there aren't enough humans in the world to get at this manually. And I wouldn't want that job, even if that job existed, right? That's just not a thing a human should do. And so like, how do we give analysts the power that they need to automate this task to go find out where are those nuggets that they really need to be going after? And, in our case, one solution is a tool like Outlier that will go do exactly that.
Awesome. I mean, so those nodding panelists, get in here. Tell us what you think.
Yeah. So I was going to jump in there, Mike, and I completely agree with you. It's, this data collection problem. One thing that we learned doing, really having Alight now for over 14 years is we had to make a decision, right? And I always share the example. I used to show up on site and say, yeah, we got some data. Let's build a dashboard. And we get on a whiteboard, and 6 months later, we were still staring at the whiteboard. And so I think the problem that we discovered is I think you mentioned it earlier. How do I get started? And so what we did in Channel Mix is we actually built out of the box data models that when you connect all these things, you have basically a unified data model that's aligned to a unified dashboard strategy. So you have something, because that's the biggest challenge in this world that we live in is, okay, cool. I connected a bunch of stuff. It's now in a single source. Now what do I do? And we were doing that really well for a long time, but where we were failing was we weren't giving anybody a starting point. And so now we preach 4 levels, and I can talk about that later if you want, but there's different starting points. And the first starting point is you got to get it all together and then get visibility to it, because that's where you start. That's where insight begins. It doesn't begin at the data collection and aggregation. It begins at, I can see it.
Yeah, I talk about it as you must be this tall to ride. We've all been to the amusement parks where it's like, if you're not this tall, and you just can't get on the ride. And Matt, I love the point of like getting people that head start to get to that point where they're this tall, right? Because at least then you've got your data, you're visualizing it, and then you're going to be stuck asking the now what. My co-founder has this great story where he used to run the largest mobile analytics platform on the planet, and he would go deploying this around the world. And you do the classic training, and you got your roller bag, you're 1 foot out the door, and you ask, any last questions? Anyone been there? I've definitely been there. And everyone had the same last question, which is, this is great. What should I look for?
Now what? Right.
Now what? Yeah. See, Matt, you've done, roller bag in your one hand, left, 1 foot out the door, like, any last questions? And it's the same last question. And it's really the same first question we all have every day, which is, now what? And so again, that's Scott, your question, like, that's what we're out there trying to help analysts answer every day. Like, the now what, every morning, what should I be doing, right?
And Sid, did you have some thoughts there? I saw you playing with your mute button there.
I have a lot of thoughts, but to be honest with you, there is a disconnect between fancy looking dashboards and actionable decisions. And I think that is what Mike and Matt were alluding to, like, how do we bridge that gap today? Like, everyone's talking about the modern data stack and whatnot, but at the end of if the end goal is just a dashboard, is that what we truly want?
Right.
We want to stare at a chart, or do we want to take decisions? And so how do we bridge that gap? Because I think what I'm seeing a lot of enterprises that I speak with on a day-to-day basis, the leaders at those companies are thinking about, bridging this gap.
Yeah, I would completely agree, and Sid, probably like all the panelists here, I have a lot of opinions and they're all free. So it's probably for them today. My point is that, so we have Channel Mix, which is basically an analytics platform unified, and then we use Tableau and Power BI. We always say, don't get caught up in what the stinking dashboard looks like. Don't get caught up in, I don't like pie charts, I like donut charts, so the same thing. Whatever. So don't get caught up on that. Just what I want you to try to learn how to do is actually consume information rather than assemble information, which is really the first step. And that's just what we preach for the first 30 days. It's just learn how to consume it. And what is it telling you? I'm just using a dashboard as my vehicle, but the dashboard isn't the end state. It's literally just the mechanism that's carrying the data so you can consume it. And for too long, we would sit down and have these giant meetings about, well, this is the font that I want to use, and we treated it like this great piece of creative. And I'm like, guys, it's just a stupid dashboard. Come on, let's just, what do we want it to tell us? Because if it doesn't tell me something within the first 5 seconds in really 1 minute, then it's worthless. So let's move on and figure out something that can tell us that.
I'm going to piggyback on something that both Matt and Sid said here about dashboards, and I'm not here to pile on dashboards, because dashboards have their place. There's very good reasons why we have them. Think about your car, dash. You want to know those there's a critical piece of information. You want to know them. They have their place. None of us here are piling on and saying dashboards are bad, right? Like, they have their place. But what I would say is one of the key indicators that I would say backs up Sid's point, backs up Matt's experience is dashboards gone wrong. Right. And what I would say is, like, dashboards gone wrong is where you start trying to proliferate them to the point where you're trying to cover all your bases. And suddenly, instead of like the 3 indicators that you really should be paying attention to, you've got 22 dashboards. I talked to a company that had a 90-minute executive meeting every week where they stared at 22 dashboards. That's why the number 22. And see, Shahina's laughing because she's probably been in one of these meetings. They're key executives, 90 minutes every week, staring at 22 dashboards, trying to figure out what is going on instead of making decisions, instead of trying to move the business forward. And this is like one of those classic, you've done it wrong. When, ... And the other favorite stat I have is the average lifespan of dashboard is about 3 weeks. You build it, and about 3 weeks later, no one ever stares at it again. And so these are my 2 classic indicators of, like, okay, you are this tall to ride. You've got dashboards, you've got visualizations. Hopefully you're not falling into the trap Matt's talking about where you're like wondering about what font to use on it. But Now what, right? How do I get from these dashboards to decisions to focusing on these things and not spending hopefully 90 minutes a week trying to read tea leaves out of them, right?
I think that's one of the bigger problems is a lack of understanding at the executive level. And again, data-driven business is, pretty new term. The difference between reporting and analysis is kind of a big deal. And, we just same as you were saying, but a lot of companies try and build their own reporting suite out of daisy chain dashboards. And so the way I kind of try and describe it to clients is just like you said with the car, reporting lets you know how fast you ran a mile. Analysis lets you learn how to run a faster mile. And they're disconnected things, equally valuable. But if you use the wrong thing for the wrong purpose, you don't win, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. That point about getting the executives on board, I think that's the biggest point there. I think it's a big cultural shift, right? Everybody needs to be on board to be able to say, great, dashboards are great. It makes me understand what's going on. But now how do we take that and move into insights and then action, right? Because data for the sake of data means nothing. Data for the sake of making decisions, making actions that are going to be better for users, consumers, etc., is where we want to be.
Totally.
And actually, so we've got some questions from the audience already. I think one of the, I think this is all well and good, but one of the comments that folks are saying is what do you do when you have kind of large, like, you have siloed institutions? Like, how do you drive decisions and consensus? And like, again, how do you get this high when you're in a siloed organization?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. There's a very robust and growing segment of like what I would call it's like data warehouse 2.0. There are these people who are really trying to come in and figure out, data. I think they're calling them data lakes now, right? Like it's like, how do I get all of this information from all these different sources, and pour it into one lake so I can analyze it? And I don't think that's what we're here for, is to talk about data lakes. And even that's a challenge. I think, as Shayna pointed out, like getting the executive buy-in to do one of those projects you're talking about a very expensive, possibly a multi-year project just to get all your silos unsiloed, right? So let's talk about the reality. Like for a lot of our attendees, you're not going to be able to go and convince your executive leaderships to go do that off the bat. Even if you did, it's your ROI is years away, right? So what can we do today with your siloed data sets? And it's worse than just siloed, right? Think of how many different tools your average MarTech stack consists of, right? And how many of those are in how many different places. If you're going to automate this, if you're going to really get at the insights that are in all of this, you need a tool that can connect to all kinds of different sources. One of the things that we did right away at OutlierAI is we realized that there was going to be a mix of both cloud as well as SQL-based data sources. And we said, all right, great, we'll build adapters to all of it. And so our strategy around this is let's break down the silos by being the central place where all the data might come in, and we'll do all the analysis once it's brought in, right? So whether your data is in Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, or your favorite flavor of SQL, we'll go connect to it, pull it in, do the analysis, and break down those silos inside of one tool. And so I think that's the nice strategy. The nice point about that strategy is you can kind of bypass a lot of the institutional inertia, a lot of the executive buy-in and the jujitsu you have to do internally to get to the point where you can even, get all your data in one place. And I'm not going to get into the whole other nightmare of like, oh wait, but marketing and sales has two different definitions of what a lead is, and how do I, reconcile them when they collide together? And if anyone who's done this for long enough has definitely fought that battle, right? And then of course, that's its own separate issue. But Scott, I'll pass it back to you there.
I would probably, yeah.
Go for Matt, and then we'll do Jim, and then we'll switch over to Shahina's topic. So Matt, you want to go?
Yeah, I would. So definitely getting the data all together into a single platform. I mean, when we started the company at Alight, we were piecing it all together in Excel, and we either had to make a decision to build a platform, or maybe I was going to have to get a new liver because it was really exhausting, right? And so when we built Channel Mix, that's all we built it to do, was just to get all this data together. I would probably answer the question though differently, in the sense that, well, complementary, I would say. Typically with siloed organizations, you have three things going on. There's obviously politics. And so one of the things that we do is as we talk about how to deal with that. The second thing is, how are you starting the conversation? So you as the individual. So typically what we do is we start conversations with, hey, I generated this many clicks and impressions. Nobody cares. What you need to start with is, how much revenue did you drive? What growth did you bring to the organization? So you have to change your starting point. And the third thing is how you collaborate, right? So that collaboration point really ties to the first component. What we've told organizations many times is just show up with a dashboard, start your conversation at here's how I'm impacting growth. And literally in the dashboard, you have an empty slot. And they point at it and say, well, that's where Steve's data is, but Steve won't give me the data. And just be literal like that. And we've had those conversations because it's kind of silly, right? We're all trying to move the organization forward, whether you're a consultant, whether you're a platform, whether you're a solutions provider like us. So just have the honest conversation, but it doesn't have any credibility unless you start the conversation high enough with quantitative reality. And we like to show up with soft metrics and really data that's too low. And those are things that we can control, that go along with obviously creating a single source of data truth, which is really the vehicle that drives that.
Jim, you want to round us out on this topic?
Round out I shall. I have not met Brian Piper, but Brian's question about large siloed institutions and dealing with them is basically pumping the gas on my talk. Come see it live in October. I really think that it's not just medical centers and universities, et cetera. And we're based in Ottawa, Canada, so I know a whole lot about how government works and silos. Any organization that's big enough to have a discrete marketing organization and IT organization has this problem, and they hate each other. They won't share the water cooler, right? And I really feel like the initial solve, similar to the direction Matt was taking, is leading with people and process and alignment, and then following through with technology, right? Again, a data-driven business is not a center of excellence where there's one guy who knows how to use Adobe anymore. Where all the kids are in the pool. How do we play nicely together? And that's really people and process. Again, Jim Kane, live, October.
I totally agree. I mean, the days of, if you build it, they will come they've never existed and they won't come. It really is, data initiatives are about kind of people, process, and technology. Jim, thanks for kind of rounding us out there. Let's go over to Shayna, and I think I'm really excited for Shayna to introduce herself, because she's got great experience, but like the topics that Shayna really wants to talk about are kind of creating a culture of like conversion rate optimization. And I think that's like such an awesome topic. So like Shayna, introduce us to you and where you're coming from, and then we'll kind of dig into your topics.
Cool. Thank you, Scott. Love the energy. So like I said, I am Shayna, working at Merkle in the EMEA region. For those of you who don't know, Merkle is a CXM agency, so customer experience management agency. We're working with all sorts of clients globally to kind of build and execute customer-centric strategy. So myself, I've been working in conversion rate optimization for the last 6 years. And I think some of the topics that we've been talking about already in the last 20 minutes really drives into that end point, right? So we have all this data, we can do all sorts of stuff with it, we can get insights, we can create models, but at the end of it, how do we then action it? How do we then move that forward and make decisions? And so I have a really interesting background in consumer psychology, so I love to bring that together and try to understand the user and try to understand how they feel, how they think, what they're motivated by, so that we can make sure that the actions that we put forward are actually resonating with the end user, because that at the end of the day is what's important, right? Not what I think, not what Scott thinks, but actually what the users do and what the users think. So that's kind of what I love to do. More recently, I've been doing a lot of transformation pieces with our clients and organizations to be able to get them on board with this type of performance or experimentation culture, to really think about how do we take their data-driven strategy, however it is right now, enhance it, and then actually propagate that to be able to move outwards into the company.
Awesome. So the topic I'd love to dig in with you is everybody wants to do A/B testing. Everybody wants to do conversion rate optimization. The organizations that I think do it well have this culture of experimentation. It's not like a checkbox, like it's not just like a step. It is like living and breathing experimentation. And so my question to you, Sheen, is like, how do you build that culture of experimentation?
Yeah, really good question. So I guess, like you said, Scott, there's a lot of companies out there who want to do A/B testing, but I think there's a differentiation between website testing and an experimental culture it's a bit more broad, it's a bit more far-reaching, because A/B testing is one small part of it, right? So website testing is a small part of it. We're talking about doing testing and experimentation across any type of business decisions, whether that's new products, customer service, marketing, website. All of those different types of things are things that we can start to experiment on. And we were talking about the big giants who are doing a lot of experimentation, thousands of tests a day, a week, a month. And this is why they are at the edge of innovation, because they start to challenge the status quo. They start to challenge what works and what doesn't. And so coming back to your question, Scott, how do we create this culture? I think there's a few important factors. And like we said, it's a transformation piece. So this is not a one-time little project. This is something that takes years to do. But I think there's a couple of things that I would put as the top priorities to be able to get there. I think the first one is to get everyone on board, right? You can't have one person waving a flag and trying to do it. You need to get everybody on board, whether that's with a training program, whether that's, there's all sorts of ways you can get everybody on board, because you need that buy-in. Without that, you're going to have one person doing it, and then nobody's really going to care. So, and I love the concept of experimentation. And there's a phrase that's used by Stanford Institute of Design, where they call it do to think. So it's very much like an agile MVP type of thinking, but it's basically you do something, put it out there, minimum viable product, cheapest, easiest, fastest way to get it out there, to get an answer, to get learnings, rather than spending 2 years thinking about something and then doing it. It's do it, learn, do it, learn, do it, learn. And so I think getting everyone on board with that type of thinking and that methodology starts to propagate that across the business. And the other thing with this is that when you start doing and then thinking and getting these learnings, that learning can start to become another data set, right? So we have quantitative data, qualitative data, but adding this experimentation data as a new layer starts to help with decision making, right? So it's a cyclical approach. It's not a project. It's something that's continuous, iterative, design, test, learn, iterate, design, test, learn, iterate. So I think that's quite important. A second point would be to, when you have all of this and everyone's on board, make sure that you can democratize these decision making, right? So if I'm running an experiment and I think, oh, cool, I've learned something about the user, I'm going to decide to do this. But if I can't, and I have to go through all sorts of layers to be able to make that decision, again, it's a blocker, right? So making sure that everyone at every level of the organization has the power within limits to make decisions and push these things forward.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think that totally makes sense. Let's bring the rest of the panelists to the digital stage again and kind of get some feedback. Who wants to go first?
I actually wanted to ask Shahina a question. That was a really wonderful breakdown, by the way. And I actually started in optimization in the early 2000s before I went, this is too hard. I'm going to do analysis.
Leave it to Shahina.
Leave it to smart people. Yeah. But testing is really just a new type of question for analysis. It's what if, right? And so when you start to layer all the what ifs on all the what happens, it really opens up all kinds of neat stuff. And the question that I have for you is, lots of times when we've seen large enterprise testing initiatives suck, it's because there's a clear lack of ownership on execution. It's have you ever heard a camel is a horse designed by a committee? Anyways, we've had a lot of clients make camels and be very unhappy with them. And when we see an organization where, like, not someone's forcing testing, but there's, again, contrary to what I said before, but almost a center of excellence, that's when you can start to get production schedules and what ifs become reality. What do you think the importance is of a dedicated testing team inside an organization?
Yeah, it's so true, because there's been so many organizations or clients that we've been working with where it sucks, right? There's so many times where there are so many blockers, and I can talk for days on the amount of blockers that I've seen. But to your point, yes, a center of excellence is good and bad in some ways, right? It's really good in the fact that ideally it becomes this place where people can share information, gather learnings, and then share that across the business. But if nobody's bought into it, then it's not going to work, right? And I think there's also the fact that people need to have, I think there's a secret sauce here. I think people need to have the humility to understand that, what, maybe I don't have all the answers, and maybe testing, like you said, these hypotheses, these what ifs are the way in which we can answer these questions, right? Maybe I don't know, and my gut feel and my opinion is not what matters. It's the data and the truth that matters, and that's how it should be able to move forward with that.
And if a test fails, we still learn something, and that's awesome.
Yeah, honestly, that's the biggest thing. When people start to test and they start calling it failures, I really want to switch that mentality, because it's not a failure, right? Exactly like you said, Jim, you learned something, and imagine you didn't test it and you put it out there and it completely, right? Then what? So I think that's the learning, right? Mitigating risk as well.
I was gonna, first of all, I completely agree with the process and strategy and structure you laid out. I think it's awesome and absolutely right on. I think that the things that I've seen in being in this business for so long is that because we don't have a collected data universe, and why it sucks is we use another 5-letter word, and we start guessing, right? We just guess. Well, this feels like we should try this, and really your testing strategy isn't targeted. It's not meaningful, because you're just kind of like, I don't know, James, what do you think? Let's try X, Y, or Z. And it's not really grounded in anything. And so I think that, that almighty 4-letter word of test, it has to be, in order to be facilitated properly, it goes back to the cornerstone of what we were talking about earlier. And that is, I have to have a meaningful source of truth within my data set. And obviously there's a whole layer of tracking strategy, which we can get into later on, probably as we touch on third-party cookies. But I mean, those things have to be there. Your plumbing and your infrastructure has to be there, otherwise your test's going to be very small. Sure, I can run different tests on ABs on landing pages and maybe different creative and those sorts of things. But if I really want a meaningful strategic test, I've got to look wider. And I think that's what the industry really should be pushing the testing strategy towards, is not just these micro tests.
Especially like you said, having some sort of KPI framework that the entire business is working towards, rather than these fragmented, oh, does yellow work better than green? Does that really matter? For me, I don't think so. But right, more strategic type of testing, like you were saying, Matt.
It might just make me feel better, but it's not gonna. There's no line to growth here. There's no line to revenue. So
exactly.
and that's where I've seen testing kind of get derailed. It's like, okay, well, that didn't really tell me anything. Sure, we want to learn. It's not a failure. It's just, okay, well, don't go that direction. But it has to be meaningful, is what I was getting at.
Fab.
Sid, Sid or Mike, do you have something to add?
I mean, I actually agree with most of what everyone has said so far. A lot of the companies or customers that I work with, they consider testing to be very high up in the data hierarchy of needs. And so, there's a lot of excuses. We don't have data in the right format. Data is not clean enough. And so what I say to them is start small and don't let perfection be the enemy of good. But my question to the group would be, are there instances where we should not test, or should we test everything? When is testing not good? And that is something that I've thought about a lot, because, testing everything, nobody has time for that. So how do we make sure that we are optimizing for the right amount of tests, as opposed to just blindly testing everything?
Shayna, do you want to take this as a resident testing expert?
I mean, I agree. You can't test everything. It's just going to be a waste of resources, right? I think there are some fundamental things that should work in terms of usability. Things should work. Things should be, technically be good for the user. But there are certain times where testing shouldn't be up in the front runnings because it might be a bit too, not dangerous, but risky to be testing at certain periods, right? So I know some companies test during Black Friday and Christmas because they have a lot of traffic. And I think that's great, but there are some that don't because it's going to be very risky if 50% of their users see a drop in revenue, right? So it really depends on the risk factor in when you're testing and what you're testing and the impact that you're going to see.
Matt, do you want to round us out on this, and then we'll switch over to Sid's topic?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I would just echo what was just said. I think testing has to have a goal, and it shouldn't be which of the primary colors of the rainbow should we use. It should be how much lift am I going to drive in whatever I'm trying to achieve. If I'm in lead gen and I'm a demand gen marketer, then what's my expected lift going to be on conversion rate, and ultimately all the way through the pipeline. I mean, those are the things that are meaningful. And so I think, Sid, to your question, that's where we always start with testing. Like everybody, we like pretty things, and we like to test whether the pony or the horse or the camel and works better. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if it doesn't drive revenue from our perspective. And that's just what we preach. It has to drive growth. Everything has to be grounded in, are we helping the company move forward?
Scott, before we move on, I just want to add one quick note. So like, I love the question. I love the topic of culture. As a startup founder, I obsess about culture and I think about it a lot. And so like, what I want to share is like, when I think about culture, there are a lot of dimensions you can think about culture. And so these all apply to data-driven cultures inside of organizations. One of them is values. And, I think something that we've heard from all the speakers about this is, does your organization value psychological safety? Right. And that's the new buzzword for like, is this an organization that encourages taking risks and that, rewards it? And we'll see things where if it doesn't turn out, you'll see them as a learning, not a failure. Like, that's a great thing that, Shayna pointed out. Mm-hmm. Another dimension is like, what rituals does your culture have? Right. And so, for example, most analytics organizations, their ritual is, I have a quarterly report I've got to generate, or I've got like a monthly, compliance thing I got to do, or some cadence that they're on. What if that ritual were daily? What if that ritual were around like, hey, let's see what these experiments are doing and how they're behaving. And of course, you can look at culture in the realms of like artifacts. What kind of tools do they use? Or you can look at it in terms of structure. Are you centralized? Are you not? But I do think that like the culture piece and how you can change culture and transform it, you can attack it along any one of those different dimensions as well. So it's like culture change is hard. It takes time, but you have a lot more avenues at it than you think, because any one of these things is a lever towards actually making change in your organization.
Awesome. Really good way to round out that chapter of our talk. Now let's switch over to Sid. Sid, you want to do your long intro? Tell us about you, what you're up to these days, and then we can kind of get into some of the topics you want to chat about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sid. I lead the solutions engineering team here at Sisu Data. And in this role, I help companies evaluate Sisu's product, which is a decision intelligence platform, from a technical standpoint pre-sales, and also get to work with them post-sales and help them be successful. And in this role, I often get to wear the hat of a consultant or a trusted partner to data leaders at these companies, helping them navigate their data stack effectively, and sometimes suggest new tools based on their business needs and data maturity. Before Sisu, I was the first SC at a company called Mode Analytics, which is another like Bay Area analytics company, pretty much doing the same thing. And so I worked with, at the time, close to 700 Mode customers, helping them get up and running with Mode's data platform. And before Mode, if I go way back, I was an analytics consultant specifically focused on retail and CPG industries. So I've been on both the sides of the table, where I am now on the product and trying to make sure how next generation data platforms can be applied to various analytics problems. And previously, I was the one actually implementing problems and solving those data questions and answering to stakeholders and all that good stuff.
Awesome. I think your topic is really near and dear to my heart, which is the modern data stack. Could you tell us what the modern data stack is and why and when someone needs that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me briefly touch on what does the word stack really means for the benefit of those who've never really heard of it. The word stack comes from this concept of a technology stack. And a technology stack is basically a combination of technology services that are used to build and run one single application. So as an example, Facebook uses a combination of coding frameworks and languages, including JavaScript, HTML, PHP, React.js. And so we call that Facebook's quote unquote tech stack. And so now the question is, why is building technology in a stack-like fashion important? And so what happens is when you put together discrete tools or frameworks that do one thing and do it really well, and also play well with the tools that come before and after them, you get two very important benefits. Customizability is number one, and interchangeability is the second one. So in other words, you can customize your solution to your own unique needs, taking into account your available time, resources, and budget. And then when you need new functionality, you don't have to replace the complete stack. You can replace, piecemeal those solutions, based on your specific needs. And so what happened was a few years ago, maybe like a decade ago, this pattern of the modular data stack started becoming more prominent in companies like Airbnb, Uber, and Lyft. And so leveraging this modern data stack, or modular data stack rather, allowed these companies to scale efficiently by picking and choosing the best tools that solved discrete problems without disrupting the whole system as a whole. So that's like the whole concept of data stack. And so the next question is, how does an organization get started with the process? Is that what you
Yes, yeah, go for it. You're on a roll. Don't let me stop you. Keep going.
Okay. So in my experience working with close to like 700-800 companies, mostly all companies fall into one of two groups. The first are like small organizations that don't have sophisticated tooling and are basically starting with a clean slate. And the second group includes organizations that have systems of the previous generation that are not really cutting it anymore.
Or several generations ago.
Several, like SAP. We're talking about early 90s. And so,
hey, COBOL's coming back, guys. COBOL is coming back. Just wait for it.
Oh, I'm waiting for a WebTrans joke, but okay.
So like if I specifically zoom into the first group, which is, companies basically starting from a zero, and if you fall into this group, you basically have some sort of reports available. For example, if you're like a retailer or like an e-commerce company, you have a point of sales system that gives you access to some aggregated dashboards or reports. And likely that data is delivered to you weekly, bi-weekly in discrete batches. And anytime a stakeholder, the VP of Ops, has a follow-up questions, those primitive systems actually break down. And so the modern data stack can actually fill that information gap in a company like this, providing fresh, granular data that can be used to not just surface high-level trends, but also if you want to dig deeper into any one of those insights, you can do that. And so one of the problems here is that there is no 360-degree view of the business that's present in these companies, and the modern data stack provides you, with that complete holistic view of everything that's happening in your business. And so I think to the earlier point, the marketing and the sales team are on the same page as far as how are we defining leads, and we are working off of the same numbers and all that good stuff. And the second group are companies that just need to rebuild their stack from bottoms up. They already understand the value, but they don't either have the skills in-house or they don't have the time needed to make that switch because they're already swamped with that, ad hoc, reactive queue type process where business stakeholders are just swamping the data team with so many questions. And what these companies and the leaders at these companies need to understand is that the more they delay the move over to the modern stack, the more time they'll spend in a broken reactive queue of data requests. And so the analyst is not, focusing on high value activities that can provide leverage to the business. They're just working on low end data prep / ad hoc type requests.
Yeah, I think of it as like, we've come to a lot of organizations, and let's bring the rest of the panelists up to the stage. I think that like in a lot of organizations, when Brooklyn Data, when I come in and we're helping clients, you see these analysts that are just like, every time they get their head above one wave, they get hit by the next. And it's just really impossible for them to think even to think about how to get themselves to a modular data stack and to a modern data stack. And when you can get them there and they can finally keep their head above water, it's just like, it is not only a output shift and like a quality shift, but it's like a satisfaction shift, a culture shift. Like it isn't just technology. It really is just changing the way people work. Again, I don't want to do most of the talking. We've got great panelists here. So who wants to weigh? Jim, did you want to weigh in?
I just wanted to say, and by the way, I think we all have some really awesome war stories to share when we get to meet in person. It sounds like there's some real prior art here. The lobby bar is always the funnest part. Yeah. All I could think about when Sid was talking was these job descriptions I've been seeing recently for digital analysts. And it's been like this for years, but like must have PhD, must be a systems integration expert, must be good at SQL, and it's like this like unobtainium, impossible. It's everyone on this phone call's resume mushed into one job description.
Unicorn.
The unicorn employee. And that's what a lot of these job descriptions are. And most people don't take their foundation seriously, right? It's like you're a nerd, figure it out. And, Sid, per your point, if you have an architect digging ditches, you're not adding value to the business. Like, how do you get those foundations in place? I like the way you described it.
Yeah. I was going to, I think as we look at kind of the modern data stack, the industry's done some interesting things. Really, if you kind of look back over the last 10 years, we rushed to dashboards, and then we rushed to kind of single stack tools that have their own data framework, their own visualization. And then we rushed to like looking at different pieces of the data, what I call intelligence manufacturing, from connector tools to data wrangling tools to data warehousing to data prep, data blending tools to dashboard and visualization tools. And so we've as an industry, I think, and really culturally, I think we've looked at the modern stack as almost a patchwork sometimes. Like, oh, well, let's take this piece and let's try to fit it in over here into our current stack, rather than analyzing our whole stack and saying, either these actually work and let's keep this, or let's just wipe it clean, like you were saying, Sid, which I completely agree with. And I think one of the biggest frustrations that I had, really have had over the years in building Alight has been, by nature, I'm going to take the shortcut. And every time I took a shortcut, it literally just impeded our progress long term. And so when we reset our framework with Channel Mix, we wanted one platform that can not only connect it, blend it, unify it, drop it into a lake, transform it, throw it into a warehouse, and make it analysis ready into a dashboard tool. Like, we wanted that for the industry as an end-to-end stack. And I think that for many people, whether that approach makes sense or not, the context of that idea is really what organizations should be looking at, not just piecemeal, but as an end-to-end stack. What makes sense for my organization? And like, for example, our platform, Channel Mix, doesn't make sense for everybody. They may just want, a piece of it because they've got a cloud-based infrastructure over here that works really well. Okay, cool. But for many, they don't. And frankly, most organizations are way behind in really leveraging the technology stack that is available to them today. And so we spend a lot of time in educating in this space, like I'm sure the rest of the crew here does.
Totally. Other thoughts on the modern data stack from the group? If not, we've got a question from the crowd. One of the questions is around data governance, and I think like this is one of the things where I feel like, from my perspective, hasn't really caught up yet. Like, I feel like a lot of the data governance solutions feel a little bit, you've got these like really heavy, earlier generation data governance tools, and I'm kind of waiting to see kind of what that next wave, and there's a lot of really interesting technologies come out. I'd love to hear kind of how the group thinks about data governance and how folks are dealing with it today.
So I think that there's two, like I went to a talk at a web analytics conference years ago about what I call uppercase G data governance, big G. And it was someone from, a Fortune 100 company, and she showed the flow chart behind her on how data governance was done and then the tooling. And it's basically, again, like a government department. Like uppercase G governance is major league ball stuff. And I think that concept is so intimidating that mid or SMB organizations, like sub 100 million revenue companies, bypass it altogether, and that's where you get into trouble. And to quote Montel Jordan, lowercase g governance is no Montel Jordan fans. All right. But like I have this data coming into my business. Is it always consistent and accurate? We need to normalize our e-commerce data in Google Analytics versus our order management system. Is it consistent and close on the daily? Those kinds of lowercase g governance, or we built something for our data stack. Have we documented it in such a way that it could be consistently maintained? And I think so many people are so intimidated by the big heavy duty IBM edition that they don't take some basic steps for kind of preventative maintenance or lowercase g stuff. And it leaves a lot of people hanging, especially, you find out you spent $1 million on media last week targeting the wrong people, which, I'm sure we've all seen that happen.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think on data governance? I imagine kind of in Outlier world, you're kind of thinking about data quality all the time.
I think there's I think there's a couple of angles that we think about this from. There's I'm looking at Shayna because she runs EMEA, but like GDPR, right? Everyone's favorite data pirate. What's a pirate's favorite data regulation? Like GDPR, right? Like
who said data people aren't funny?
No. So we have that angle of things, and then we have the correctness and the what's the word I'm looking at? Provenance, and then the maintenance and all of that angle of things. So when we started with Outlier AI, we definitely had both of those ideas in mind, and we're thinking very carefully about for ourselves, how do we as a new entrant in this space think about privacy? How do we think about governance? How do we think about helping others think through these solutions? And so for the classic garbage in, garbage out, right? There's everyone knows this problem. And so I think here, one of the strategies that we took was to not be smarter than we could be, is the best way I could describe it, right? So there are a lot of solutions out there that will try to impute the right answer. Be like, oh, did you mean this Jim Kane and this Jim Kane? Do you want us to fuse those two Jim Kane records and make them the same record in your CRM? Maybe not. And more often than not, you're going to have an analyst who's staring at hundreds of these and just says, apply all, right? And that's when you're going to get those targeting problems and all these other issues. And so Outlier's approach took a very different approach. It's very descriptive. Is like, all right, given what your data looks like, we can tell you when we think something is wrong, right? Or if something suddenly goes off the rails, we can tell you that, oh, wait, this is really strange. You suddenly started sending, yesterday you sent, this many records, and now you're sending them all to the same person. Like, that's probably not good. You should probably check this out, or vice versa, right? And so behaviorally, we're looking at being able to point our users at things that we think might be underlying data governance issues, because there's exactly what Jim described, which is who's the owner, who's going to put all the right processes in place. But then there's a flip side of that, which is tactically, every single day, how are you staying on top of this? And I think today, kind of like to your point, I'd love to hear anybody else's idea on this, but the tools that are helping analysts on a day-to-day basis keep these data governances in place and keep everything clean, and I think that's still very much in its infancy, right?
I mean, the number one reason a lot of companies at the executive level don't look at those dashboards or any reporting from the digital marketing organization is because they don't believe the numbers.
Yeah, they don't trust.
Finance said it was 15. Analytics says it was 7. Sure. I don't get my bonus from the 7, right? So, that concept of governance helping create alignment, you know what I mean? But those numbers are trustworthy. They are provably accurate and trustworthy. Therefore, they are usable. Like, I'm sure you've all been in a meeting with a client before where there's 4 different departments that have 4 different PowerPoint presentations with 4 different sets of the same number from 4 different tools, and it sucks and you wish you could have just stayed home. Appropriate data governance ensures that doesn't happen, right? Everybody's drinking from the same fountain. And again, it's that lowercase g. And to directly answer the question, I would say most of our customers are doing it a little, and it definitely correlates to the size of their investment. So now that analytics is a first-class item and not don't forget to tag it, there's enough investment being made that people don't want it to catch fire later. They want it to be accurate tomorrow. And we're seeing a lot of those lowercase g investments start to become not a practice yet per se, but again, more preventative maintenance.
Totally.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that I probably have a little bit different spin on that, Jim, but completely aligned with what you're saying. Only in the sense that I think you're still going to have sometimes the 4 PowerPoints because people are going to use the number that makes them feel the best, even though it's fished out of the same pond. So I always tell people, before I started Alight, I was a CIO for many years, and I'm a recovering CIO, and is what I tell people. And I think the problem is that you have big G and you have little g, and I think that there's a case to be made for, I don't know, a regular dude G, just G that sits in the middle, in the sense that, yeah, I want the data to be consistent, but I also don't want all this overhead. I think that GDPR, sorry, Mike, I tried to do my best there, bro. I think GDPR has created this hysteria, and we just need to relax. Like, we have some global clients, and we have a full lead gen pipeline from cost all the way to customer. And it took us 2 months to talk through. I don't need to know who, I just need to know how many. Well, what if, and so we went all through these crazy, literally crazy, what if I pass you this and then somehow I hack your system and then run and figure out what this record is? Like, no, that's not reality. So we have to kind of find this middle ground. I think we have to be able to speak to it, though, in an educated fashion. I think that's our job as experts in the industry, to say, yes, we want consistent data. We understand big G governance, but let's find that middle ground that makes sense so that we can keep moving towards intelligence, because otherwise these things just become barriers to help use data to drive growth for an organization.
So I want to kind of make sure we're moving over to the next section. Sid or Shayna, do you have anything to add on this? Good. Go for it. Bring us home, Sid.
I'll just say one last thing. Governance is the big gorilla in the room for a lot of companies that we speak with, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. I think data quality is the biggest one, and so, to Mike and to Jim's point, quality really matters. Without any quality, it's garbage in, garbage out, pretty much.
Oh, awesome. Well, let's move on over to Jim. Jim, you want to tell us about you, your world, and kind of we can kind of dig into some of your topics?
Sure. I'll do it movie trailer guy, just because we're 2/3. The year was 2008, and I was at a bar, and I had become a trained digital analyst, but I was still working in sales, and most of the companies I was talking to suffered from water everywhere, not enough to drink when it came to insights. And so I had an idea to start a consulting company in analytics. They didn't have paper at the bar, hence our stupid name. My joke, though, is we're very good at measuring marketing, even if I'm not very good at doing it. That was 13 years ago. Since then, we have become kind of a full service digital analytics consulting organization. We work primarily with large enterprises, and we're also one of the largest resellers of Google Analytics 360 in the Americas. And a big part of my job that kind of leads through to the topic I'm excited to talk about in October is what I think the hardest part of my job is, which is actually what I call marriage counseling, right? So large digital projects, I forget the stat, it's in my deck, but I think 80% of most data projects fail. And that's a little frustrating. I would like to think we tend to fall in the other 20%, but it's very frustrating, especially as someone who cares about data and knows how nonfiction stories empower better decisions, to see things fail to take off, right? And one of the things that we've really learned over the last 13 years is kind of a series of methodologies around getting people to align. Like, as an example, if you ask a VP of sales what a lead is, she will give you a very, very specific definition. Now go ask the VP of marketing, right? Those are the conversations that need to be had, and understand the different philosophies that exist in some of those silos in the business, so you can create that democratized data organization. So, my talk is going to be called the 4 C's of data. It's about 4 different groups inside an organization that I call create, connect, control, and commercialize, that are often at loggerheads around what winning looks like with data. And so it's some practices on how you can bring those 4 groups together and turn that 80 and 20 in 2 different directions.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I'd love to dig into you is, yeah, like unpicking why organizations aren't more successful with data. Like, I think there is, we've been talking about being data driven, and kind of we're in this kind of like generation or decade where like data is everywhere. But why aren't people like using data to, why in the majority of organizations do we not fulfill the dream of kind of being truly data driven?
So I've got a snarky answer, and then I've got a love-based answer.
I'll take them both.
Quick version of the snarky answer is salespeople, and I am one, right? So, but you see waves in the marketplace where, like, how many tools are called CDPs? And none of them do the same thing, right? I refer to the CDP as the enterprise fondue pot, because everybody bought one and it sits on a shelf and gathers dust and they've never used it, right? But the value proposition of CDPs is wonderful. It makes absolute sense. The fact that they're aggressively sold based on a single use case that never finishes getting implemented, that's kind of a problem, right? And so I think that the speed at which this marketplace has gone for the last 15 years, and the fact that it's very hard for large organizations to keep up with technology, have allowed people to try and buy their way out of trouble. Mm-hmm. And that, just, as everybody on this phone knows, that doesn't work. You gotta grab it and own it, right? I think that's a big part of the reason why we continue to have challenges. And the other part of the reason is that, 20 years ago, there would be a BI group, or there would be a center of excellence for data. And that made sense. Data wasn't real time. Data was like, catalog companies who were like the best at data, 20 years ago or 25 years ago, those were monthly spreadsheets if they were lucky, right? Real-time data, and the fact that every single part of the business is now generating data, means that center of excellence model is flawed. It means that, I think Shayna said earlier, like the democratization of data, which is, it's a $50 phrase, but I really like it. Everybody needs to be a little bit of an analyst to be awesome at their job. And that means that everybody owns data together. And I think a huge piece of transformation, or again, creating a data culture, is actually around conflict resolution and alignment. I think it's a people thing.
Cool. Let's bring the panelists up. What do we think? I mean, I know I agree with this statement. Mike, you seem to have an opinion.
Well, I just want to agree. It's absolutely a culture piece. Like you have to solve, and I know Shayna's like nodding along with us, but like it's totally a culture piece. I would also highlight one other thing is, and this kind of ties to Sid's question as well as to Jim's observations, which is, you've got the modern data stack. All right, you've got a center of excellence, or you don't, or you did, or whatever it is. You've got all these things, and why aren't we getting the ROI? I mean, Scott, that was like your kind of direct question. And my answer to this is looking at it from first principles. What I would say is, modern analytics to date has been really good at answering the questions that we know to ask. Right. And so, but unfortunately, this means that's directly the value you're going to get is directly hinging on how good are your questions. Right. Yep. And if you're not asking good questions, you're not going to get a lot of value out. And this goes back to both Shayna's and Jim's point. If you have a culture that's not asking good questions, that's not testing the right things, that's not testing at all, you're not going to get a lot of value out. Right. It's just not going to be the case. And, obviously, that same insight is what led us to OutlierAI, which is like, can we get people to ask better questions every single day? Can we ask better questions? And we've definitely noticed that people who adopt, and I know Jim rolled his eyes, but transformational technology, that like will really help you get at this root cause of ask better questions. We do see that they get ROI and everything else that they've invested in, right? Because what's the point of collecting it if you can't visualize it, analyze it, ask the right questions of it, make better decisions off of it? Sid's going to jump in here now. But like, what's the point of doing all of this if you can't get at the reason why we exist as analysts, which is to go ask the right questions, right?
I definitely would want to jump in here because Mike, you actually mentioned something really important, which is very near and dear to my heart, which is decisions. A decision is basically what modern knowledge work is all about. Whether you're in sales, marketing, product development, you're making decisions on a day-to-day basis. And the output of your job is measured by a few different KPIs, and in organizations of thousands of people, every person is making 5 to 10 decisions per day. Do I do this or that? And all of these decisions add up to that final KPI, and that somehow ties to profit or loss. And so over time, as we are collecting more and more data, the focus has shifted more towards those fine-grained metrics that lead to some sort of decision. And that's where Gartner is of the mind that a new breed of tools called decision intelligence platforms come in. And I'm happy to expand more, but I just wanted to jump in and say that, yes, I completely agree. That is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to expand on that.
I was going to jump in. I literally just gave a talk yesterday on really why marketing isn't. We talk about being data driven, but we're really not. And like we like to use it in a sentence, like, "Oh, I'm a data driven marketer." Cool. What does that mean? Well, what do you think it means? I don't know. So I think first of all, we have to understand, particularly as marketing as an industry, we just haven't been good with data for a long time. And so as a culture within our industry, we tend to run back to the things that we know. And the things that we know and trust are things that we can see, like clicks and impressions and costs and conversion rate, all based on media platforms. Like typically that's what I see in many of the conversations. And so what I always challenge, data driven is really built around where are you starting your conversation? Are you starting your conversation around how much media coverage you provided? I saw a question earlier in the chat of how do I align earned media impressions? Well, the simple reality of it is you have to speak the language. You have to speak in, we dig on salespeople, and I'm a salesperson. I'm an owner. So, I have to be able to sell, but at the end of the day, you have to make that conversation quantitative. And so you have to speak in the language, and you speak in language like pipelines. And that's what we always preach to marketers is use the same language, use the same conversation, just put it into context of what it means to you. And so as a marketer, you spent this much and you generated this much demand. Cool. What did that demand mean from an average customer value, LTV, lead acquisition costs, et cetera? How many of those leads that you're giving sales, how many of those are actually being worked? Let's have that conversation. Let's have that alignment discussion versus we tend to start our conversations too small and then there's nowhere to go. We just go down. So you have to give room in your conversation, and analytics has to be that roadmap and that story to start that conversation higher. And as an industry, we just have to challenge ourselves to think bigger. Because I can tell you, in doing this for so long, we tend to be we're humans, and so we run to things that we're comfortable with. And so we run to the data that we know because we've been for so long piecing it together at this micro level. And so I'm familiar with it. I'm not familiar with presenting a marketing funnel or a pipeline that aligns to sales. And we need to get there. We have to get there.
Yeah, I completely agree. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, Shayna, want to go?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree. I think this conversation really is bringing together all of the conversations we've just had in the last hour, right? I think it's that, asking better questions, being out of your comfort zone. And that's okay because the more we go back to where we were, the less we're going to move forward, right? And I think, having clean data, having the integrated data, having this right culture really sets us up to be able to ask the right questions, be more bold, and to make these decisions that we want to be making data-driven, to actually build that performance type of culture to move forward and make decisions.
Yeah, awesome. I was just going to support what you were saying in terms of, like, there's a Gartner maturity model for everything. There have been many attempts to build maturity models for analytics. And I actually don't like maturity models. I do like stuff. And I have a list of stuff. And if that stuff is happening, then so an example would be what I call the death of the takeaway, right? So, you're in a meeting and someone goes, that's a good question. Let's make it a takeaway. What if they went, that's a good question. The answer is 63. Let's move on. Let's incorporate that into our, right? If you could start doing some death of the takeaway in a meeting, then your data is working. When you start using your first party data set that used to just be for reporting to create an audience to directly go out and target your media that will come back to that first party data set so everyone trusts it, then it's almost like that old, it might be a redneck thing, right? And those touch tones or those moments of data working are so much more powerful than maturity. because I think they're achievable and doable. And they're proof positive that it's working, which I think a lot of clients need. Everybody feels like they're dumb and they're behind the 8 ball and their neighbors got a nicer car than them. And I think most people are at the same playing field. They just need to find those moments,
Totally. And that's a good good note to kind of, transition to the next section. Matt, you're up. Tell us about you and your world.
All right. Yeah, sure. So, we started Alight Analytics 14 years ago, and we were very much, Jim, probably like your business, we were very much an analytics consulting company, doing we still do GA implementations, we're a reseller as well. But we made the decision about 6 years ago to really flip our model. So we had started piecing together this platform that's called Channel Mix today. And Channel Mix was really we knew we were always going to have a data problem. Guess what? We still have a data problem. We're always going to have a data problem. So we really wanted to focus our energy as a firm to build out this platform that we kind of had sitting in the back. And so today what Channel Mix is a full stack unified analytics platforms, how we talk about it, to go from collecting all of your data and giving you dashboards that tell you, hey, this is how paid search, paid social, cross media performed, to multi-channel attribution, to marketing funnel and pipelines, to marketing and sales pipelines to be able to forecast, as well as media mix modeling. And so the platform is really full stack, as we call it, and it really aligns to the 4 levels that we preach. We'll talk about that in our presentation. But I think what's important is we know that every organization has a different starting point. I have people still call me, I tell the story all the time, hey, Matt, I want a media mix model. I'm like, cool, I'd love to give you one. Where's all your data? Well, it's on James's laptop. I'm like, okay, cool. We're going to start you at level 1, and we're going to get you all your data together, and we can start to see it. And then I'm going to march you up what we call this maturity curve. And so what's been interesting when we did our model flip is we've always stayed true to, I think Susan asked the question too around what are we building dashboards in. We've always said we're going to stay true to solving the data intelligence problem and deliver that intelligence. We've aligned to Tableau that we've been using for 13 years and Power BI are the two universal tools, the dashboard, quote unquote, dashboard tools that organizations use. And we like that approach because it's tools that are already ingrained in the organization. And so I'm not delivering intelligence into another UI that maybe isn't being used in other areas of the organization. So that's the path that we've stayed true to and will continue to support. There's other partners that we're looking at, but yeah, so that's us as in a nutshell. Is we started out as an analytics consulting firm. Today we call ourselves a solutions provider because we kept all those skill sets. We have data scientists, we have data engineers, data architects, data strategists, obviously tracking strategists, because organizations need that at the end of the day. Just showing up with a piece of software that's okay, thanks. What about the other 2 legs of the stool in the terms of people and process? Well, they can use us to augment those needs as well. And so, yeah, as you've probably heard today, I'm one of the older guys on here. So I've seen it all. I've been through it all, that I like to think, but we're really passionate about telling the marketing value story, because at the end of the day, marketing is a huge asset to an organization, but we just don't always do a good job of demonstrating that value.
Cool. So thank you for the introduction, Matt. So my question to you is, and we hear this from all of our clients, or a lot of them at least, is with the death of the cookie,
yeah,
how do you measure anything? How do you measure customer journey? How do you really do attribution? Like, what should we do?
You measure it in the way that you always should have been. How about that?
Perfect. Tell us.
So, essentially third-party cookies made us lazy. And frankly, it led to a lot of our issues of walking in and having the 4 different stories, to use Jim's analogy, is, oh, well, Facebook said I generated 100 leads yesterday. Well, no, you didn't. Google Analytics said we generated 50 total. Okay. So the death of the third-party cookie in my mind is actually awesome. I think that we've always should have been using those as tools to optimize our media and how we engage with our audience. and not as the mechanism to deliver how we are delivering value to the organization. And those are two very, very different things. And so when I think about first party cookie, with all the changes that are going on with Google Analytics, version 4 migration, there's a reason why Google pushed it out to 2023, because they're trying to sync up those things. I think the one dependent that we've kind of lost that art is really our tracking strategy. And Jim, you probably support me on this, but in the sense of having a real robust tracking strategy from when somebody actually takes an engagement click or an action or a view and comes to my domain, comes to my first party domain. Well, now I have the ability to begin to pay off that journey. And not only use things like multi-channel attribution, which Google Analytics has pathing in, which is built into our model, but I take that pathing data and I apply it to all of my media costs and impressions and clicks. And now I actually have multi-channel attribution. And that approach, frankly, is an approach that we've been preaching for a long time. The idea of, I always say that direct mail ruined marketing, because I wanted to be able to send you a banner ad, Mike, and I want to know exactly when you clicked on it and converted and then ultimately became a customer. Well, that doesn't work anymore. We have to change that mindset. And we have to understand that we all make decisions differently and we go on different paths and different journeys. And so what we have to do is begin to break away from this linear look at one-to-one, to understand aggregate to aggregate and make meaning of it. And that's why attribution modeling, multi-touch attribution modeling, and ultimately media mix modeling are really the tools that we have to use to measure and demonstrate value going forward. And we got to get on that train right now. We need to be thinking that way. And so, yeah, that's a long-winded, passionate answer to, it doesn't break my heart, because I think that measuring and optimizing media is different than measuring the value that marketing is delivering to an organization. And we've confused those topics over the years.
Cool. Let's bring the panelists up. Jim,
agree.
I imagine you have thoughts. I'd love to hear them.
Always got thoughts. I mean, the move to this cookieless world, which Google has delayed, and I have some strong conspiracy opinions on that too. Maybe not today, but the third-party cookie's dead. It's already dead in Safari. Like it's, and the first-party cookie is actually no longer super valuable either, or won't be, because it only lasts for 24 hours. So we lose everything that's pan session. And, per my point earlier about people trying to buy their way out of, strategy when it comes to digital, sometimes a lot of that was third-party cookie driven, or my data lives in someone else's product kind of stuff. And, I think one of the best things about this move to the cookieless world, which by the way, is almost what we went through, 10 years ago when Google went from HTTP to HTTPS, we lost all the SEO data in GA. Like, you remember what it was like, Matt? Like the clients are just like freaking out. And we just had to have conversations where we said, okay, straight up, that's gone. You're never getting it back. It was done for privacy reasons. How do we help you approach that question in a different, better way? That's what we're doing with these changes to the third and first party cookies. And the best part is it's helping customers realize how valuable owned first party data is. That should be theirs, that should be curated, that should be valued. You know what I mean? And for 15 years, at least, data has been the waste byproduct of marketing. But it turns out that waste byproduct is actually made out of gold, and people are finally seeing it. And I'm actually really excited, not just what it's doing for privacy, which I'm a huge fan of, but what it's doing to help this recurring theme of today, which is helping businesses win and enjoy winning with data. Because thinking about these ingredients, how they're created, how they're stored, how we use them, how do they go through the data stack, is forcing people to have those conversations and get better. So I actually think the cookieless world, well, in some ways it's sending us back 10 years in terms of capabilities, is setting up the next 10 years in terms of capabilities at the same time.
I also, and the one thing I would chime in on that. So we're always going to have some sort of cookie just because of the way the websites are constructed and those sorts of things. But I also think it's more dependent upon, even if the first party cookie is only 24 hours, that's why we got to grab that data every night. We have to create intelligence every day. and we have to manufacture that intelligence in an environment that's collecting all of this every single day. And so this idea of, I mean, shoot, I work with agencies and brands all over, and sometimes they do reporting once a month, and I'm still like, you know, kind of the dog with a funny sound. You're like, huh? Like, no, I mean, no, we need to be collecting and gathering intelligence every single day so that we can learn from it, so that we can act on it. You know, it's the same thing with modeling. Like this idea of shipping off a bunch of data to a firm that does some grandiose media mix modeling that, you know, Paul comes rolling out of his mom's basement in a cloud of smoke after doing a bunch of data science for 2 weeks and says, here's your model, like, cool. Well, that data is based on 3 months ago. This model isn't even valid anymore. Like, we have to, you know, back to Sid's topic of modernizing our architecture, we have to have an infrastructure that is capturing, acquiring, blending, unifying, and creating analysis-ready data sets every single day to drive where we go in the future. And the elimination of third-party cookies is only accelerating that requirement from a technology stack.
I just want to start with how much I appreciate Matt and Jim for just completely no holds barred, ripping the Band-Aid off, no, not even giving a sliver of hope to anyone out there listening. Yeah, it's gonna be a seismic shift for sure, and I love that, you know, the people on this call are definitely like, no, but look towards the future, like look at what this means for us. And you know, I think what Matt just pointed out is exactly the thing that we've already. Here's the thing about analytics. All the problems that we've been talking about here, all the opportunities, let me rephrase, all the opportunities that we've been talking about here are already here. They're already with us, right? In the sense of like, you thought you had a lot of infrastructure problems. You thought you had a lot of issues with where to find your data or where to get the right questions out of, and with your third-party cookies. Oh, wait, let me tell you about how much more your problems are going to be worse once you have to do this all yourself, right? To Matt's point, once you no longer can rely on everyone else doing this for you, poorly or well, or in 6 different ways. Now you're going to really feel the pain that you're already in. You just don't fully realize you're in, right? You know, the reason why dashboards don't work. Dashboards haven't worked. They haven't worked. Actually, dashboards used incorrectly. They haven't worked since we've had dashboards. And so now with the death of the third-party cookie and with the reliance on first-party, oh, you thought they didn't work before? No, they never worked, right? For these misapplications of it. Now we have to get to this point where what is this next generation of tools looking forward, and where are we going to get? Where are we going to be? How are we going to chart our course forward in this brave new world, right? Yeah. So just Matt, Jim, just thanks for just like, you know, just busting that completely open.
I want to piggyback off of that. And I want to contrast this new world with the legacy world, and add like a different perspective. You know, I call it the death by dashboard filters. You cannot keep making predefined cuts in a dashboard, you know, sales by region, by product type, by channel. It's just not possible to show every single dimension being captured in the finite real estate of a dashboard. And even if you're somehow able to do that by adding a bunch of filters, the end user, your CSMs, your ops managers, they don't know where to zoom in and find something actionable, you know? And so the key is to, you know, to Mike's point, let machines automatically crunch huge amounts of data to find meaningful signals that the business cares about, and then allowing business stakeholders to apply their business context and expertise on top of it. And this has to happen, you know, continuously. It will not happen in anyone's basement once every month, you know, to Matt's point. And so we have to understand that it's not full-blown AI. It is based on the premise that although humans and AI are both processors, they have very different capabilities. And the best decisions are made when humans and machines work together. And so we have to move towards that next breed of decision intelligence platforms that make it happen.
100%. I think that's very well said, in the sense of AI and humans. That's where your synergy really happens. You can't. For too long, we've just said, "Well, this is my dashboard, and look how pretty it is," and I even got our logo in here. It's all predefined on what we think is happening, but there has to be a balance, right? There has to be a way to manage your business with KPIs and things that you're budgeting and forecasting, and elements that you need to plan around and keep unity within the organization. But it can't be just that, right? I have to continually learn, and I have to be able to find signals and other things that are happening outside of that even we'll call it a static dashboard because it's how it looks, even though it's wired up and it's updating every single day. It is just a predefined look at what we have decided to run the business. That being said, that's not it. Like, we got to have more. We've got to have constant learning of all these other things that are happening that don't get that aren't seen in this tunnel vision world of a predefined dashboard. So it does absolutely take both. And for too long, I still got clients that are still working in Excel, downloading CSVs every day. You're like, come on, man, we got get on the train. We got to move.
I totally want to take up Jim and Matt, Jim's offer on when we get together and trading war stories, because I know that behind that story is got a really good war story there.
They have Guinness in Florida, right?
There's more than one. I don't know how much time you got, but it'll probably be we'll need to start in the morning.
Sounds good.
It's 5 p.m. somewhere.
5 p.m. somewhere, exactly. Well, hey, it's 9:30 where I am. Matt, any closing thoughts on kind of, this topic before we kind of wrap up your section and wrap up this event?
I would just say that, a lot of the information that we probably shared today can be overwhelming. Everybody that I'm looking at on the screen, this is what we do for a living. And so we know this stuff. And so it can be highly intimidating and it can be a bit overwhelming. And so what I always like to tell people is just be honest as to what you have today. Like, just how are you delivering intelligence today? You know your environment, how it works and what it does. And then think about 3 things to make it better in the next 30 days. It's the 3 and 30 exercise. And those 3 things lie in, do you have all of your data? And if not, how do I get that into a centralized place, automated, ready to go? The second thing is, how am I telling my story? Is my story high enough, right? Is my story grounded in activity? Or is my story grounded in value? Because if your story starts with activity, nobody cares, right? And the last thing is, what are the resources you need to be successful in the next 12 months? And those resources are going to lie in people, they're going to lie in technology, they're going to lie in budget, right? And so you have to assess those 3 things. So really take that test, right? Do you have the data that you need? How are you telling your story? Is it high enough? And then what do you need to be successful long-term? And it's the roadmap that we preach every single time. It's why we have a framework and 4 levels, but it's the same exercise. And you know that better than we do. And we've just been trying to, impart not only a lot of passion and a lot of opinions, but a lot of ideas to help you kind of formulate that recommendation. Of course, all of us on here, I'm sure, would be happy to help.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, amazing panelists. It's been great. Shayna, Jim, Sid, Matt, Mike. Really, thanks for all of you taking the time to chat. I can't wait to see you all in person at MADS and to kind of grab a beer and talk war stories. Thank you to the kind of Informa team for putting on this event, and thanks for the attendees for attending. As kind of a special thank you for kind of everybody. We've got a special exclusive discount code for the MADS live event on October 25th and 26th. It's MADS Expert. All one word, no spaces. I hope to see you all there. Again, I haven't seen anybody in a long time, so I'm really, really looking forward to kind of the MADS conference in October. If you ever want to reach out to me, my email address is scott@brooklyndata.co. Add me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure all the kind of the panelists would love if you reach out to them on LinkedIn just to network and kind of start a conversation. I think what makes the MADS community so special is how open everybody is about sharing and learning and teaching each other. And so thanks again for everybody participating. Can't wait to see you in October. And thanks again. Bye, everyone.